Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya and I'm the daughter.
Bono and the Edge walk into a bar in Dublin.
Uh-huh.
Bartender says, "Oh no, not you two again."
I guess they still haven't found what they're looking for. A Pew Research study found that 35% of LGBTQ plus people feel that they are not at all connected or not too connected to the LGBTQ community.
Wow, that's really a high number.
It is. And only 23% of LGBTQ adults say that they feel very connected. It's a very small portion.
Well, that is pretty obvious why I think that is such a critical statistic for us right now. This podcast is all about unification, about being together, about staying together, and about creating the power that together we can really make a lot more headway for the LGBTQ plus community.
You think about it, even in our acronym, it's an acronym of diversity. LGBTQ and then the plus. L stands for lesbian, which is a very different group of people than the G for gay people, generally gay men, the B for bisexual people, T for transgender people or transsexual people, Q for queer or questioning, and then the plus for all of the other things. And sometimes you see the letters that will spill out even larger, LGBTQIA2 plus, and so on and so forth. Two for two spirits within the indigenous population has a separate way that they look at some transgender people. Intersex, of course. There's asexual and aromantic. And there's a wide spectrum, and that only touches on a little bit of it. If you look at how many different flags there are for the various groups within the LGBTQ plus community, there are dozens of flags right now. And I think that that's a good thing because we want people to find their place and to say, there's finally somebody that's like me. But the danger in that is that we can too easily feel like our real community is only this small little group. In this episode here, we want to talk about how important it is that we come back and find our unity within that larger one. On the other hand, my favorite pride flag by far is still the original pride flag with all of the colors on it. The red, blue, green, yellow. Wait, how does it go? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and then purple. They didn't do the indigo. They did it as the 6 colors. And when they go through it, each one of those has a meaning, but I have always seen it as the diversity within our group. And isn't this fabulous that we have the unity with the diversity and how important that unity is? Of course, unity matters in lots of places. We see that all throughout history in various things.
When automobiles first became something to be sold, something to be manufactured and sold, there were literally tens, hundreds probably of automobile companies out there. There were companies that started in various places all over. And they became so popular that people started looking to all the different ones, not knowing which ones to buy. Of course, there were people like Ford, and of course, it was after his name. And there were people like Chevrolet, and he called his car after his name. And there were many, many like that. Cars you've never heard of before, like Kessel, and some other products out there. But the problem was the workers were getting fed up with it all and decided that they really need to have a voice. This was also at the time in the early beginning of the 20th century when they were starting to look at you need to unite together and become one voice to protect our rights as workers against the manufacturer. Well, the problem was they all did that individually. So what would happen is one company would say, we're going to start a union. And that company would have a problem because the union might strike or something like that. It didn't matter. They really didn't have a lot of clout because what would happen with 100 car companies out there, they could easily just forget that this car company is producing cars. And if they're not producing cars, it didn't matter because the other 99 were producing cars. So the clout wasn't there. They didn't have the power. It wasn't until 1935 that they decided that the way they're going to get the clout is to create an organization called the United Auto Workers, the UAW. And it became very powerful very quickly because when one struck, they all struck. When one negotiated, they all negotiated. And it made a big difference, and it gave them a lot more clout. We see that today in countries where we see the entire European group of, or almost all of the European countries, uniting together and saying, if they strike one of us, they strike all of us. And together they become much more powerful, and they've got the clout to say, you've got to be careful here because we are NATO and we are powerful. And anybody they don't mind going against one country. They might go against one or two, like Ukraine. They go against Ukraine, but unfortunately Ukraine is not a part of NATO. That was an issue that was talked about so often. The reason they're not a part of NATO is they were never really invited to join. The time will come, I think, where that will happen. But when it does, it will be, again, adding more clout to NATO and making it much more powerful. So another country may not consider trying to attack a small country that's part of NATO. With their motto, when they strike one of us, they strike all of us. That's the way we need to think of ourselves as the LGBTQ plus community. And I will tell you, from my perspective, I would say no, it's not the LGBTQ plus community. When we unite also with all of those that are affirming as well. We unite together to make certain that we can do what is right and what is correct for us to have equal rights and to be able to live just like anyone else.
One of my favorite games, as you know, is playing tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons or other kinds of games similar to that. And one of my favorite shirts has all of the different LGBTQ flags, and then it has a picture of a 20-sided die, and it says, when one party member is attacked, we all roll initiative. The idea is that when something happens to one of us, it happens to all of us. And whatever you do, that works in any kind of team thing. If you play sports or if you watch sports, you know you function together as a team. And the reason why a team works is because the team plays together. And a team that doesn't play together, that only plays as individuals and thinks, well, I'm going to do it all on my own here. I'm really the star player. And doesn't, if you're playing basketball, doesn't pass the ball. Or if you're playing football, is not guarding and blocking and working together and do all of those things. If you think you're the star person on your own and not working together as a team, it breaks apart.
And where we see that in the LGBTQ plus community is in an area that we would refer to as cracks in the rainbow, where we see division showing up in the LGBTQ plus communities today. And they do. Yes, there are people who think, I don't care about that particular segment. This is my deal over here. I don't really know much about you. And I don't know if I really care to learn about that.
There's all kinds of places where that comes up. So we will see, for instance, a movement especially popular in the UK right now called the Drop the T movement, where L, G, and B are holding some what I would consider very transphobic viewpoints and saying we don't want to partner with the transgender community anymore. And it's really disappointing because you would think, well, wait a minute, haven't you gone through all of the same issues that we've gone through? We need to really be working together and joining together on this. Or we see it in other places where oftentimes LGBTQ spaces will be dominated by people who are in the majority on other issues. So, for instance, you have a racially diverse group of people, but everybody in leadership is white. Or you've got a wide diversity in terms of ability, but everybody in the leadership in that group is all able-bodied people. And there are not the provisions that are made for other people in the group. That's really important. Or you see class issues that come up. Sometimes you'll see generational gaps that come up where, for me, as a Gen Xer, the way that I view things is going to be different from how you, as a baby boomer or an honorary baby boomer, see things, which will be different from how millennials see things, which is different from how Gen Z sees things, and now
yes.
Gen Alpha. We have a spectrum there. But it's important that we all work together and remember that even if we don't understand how these young whippersnappers do things, that we listen up and pay attention to what they're saying, and that we also bring a voice of wisdom. Now, we need to be careful that as we're bringing our voice of wisdom, that we're not just silencing people that have an important message to bring from the younger generations, but it's also important that they listen to us as well, because we've learned some things about how LGBTQ rights go, and if we don't band together, why it's important.
Have you noticed that?
I have. Among the various generations?
Yes.
Absolutely. One of the big things is that younger folks don't necessarily realize how important it is to still be fighting for rights, because perceptions have changed so much and they kind of figure, well, this is how things are now. And they don't realize how tentative society's viewpoint is, and how right now we're seeing it push back again as the tide is starting to shift back. And people that are skeptics of LGBTQ issues are now feeling emboldened to speak up and to come against our rights on things. And it's important more than ever right now that we stand together. And that's something that I think the younger generation especially needs to know and understand.
Are you one of these people listening to this today and thinking, well, I don't see any problem here and things are okay? Maybe in your little circle. But what can you do? How can you find out what's going on? I'll tell you, the first thing you need to do is to listen better within the LGBTQ plus community and the support groups. That has become so critical. And when you discard that, you begin to add those cracks in the rainbow to your own particular circle of friends. And it becomes much more difficult for you to realize that we are united, and that united together, we are much, much more powerful. We can start thinking about that now. Realize your voice is critical.
One of my favorite authors she was named Audre Lorde. She wrote many different books and a lot of different essays, and you can actually still see some of her essays where she's actually delivering them herself on YouTube if you go search her up. One of her most famous essays, it was collected in a book called Sister Outsider. And she's writing as a black woman, a lesbian, a mother, a warrior, a poet is how she would frequently identify herself. And she said there is no hierarchy of oppressions. She would talk about how when she was in black spaces, she felt marginalized because she was a queer woman. When she was in LGBTQ spaces, she would feel marginalized because she was black. And no matter where she went, she felt like nobody really gets me. And this is not fair. And there is no hierarchy of oppressions, that you don't get to say, well, you know what? Because I'm transgender, I'm way more persecuted than gay men are now. Then gay men are way more persecuted than, we're not playing the oppression Olympics. What we're trying to do is make things fair for everybody. And that requires us, just like the auto workers union did, to gather together, to join together, and to put our voices together and to stand up and say, no, we're done. We're not going to let any of the members in our community suffer. If you would come for one of us, you come for all of us.
That's right. We want to talk about unity, and we'll do that right after this.
I'm Monica Scarbin. I love listening to the Transcendent podcasts, probably because I've been a guest speaker. I've been listening to these podcasts for over 2 years now and have found them to be not only inspirational, but very informative and emotionally lifting to my spirits, especially when I'm not feeling very hot. I'm a supporter, and I'm glad to be a supporter. Please go to transcendent.com, click on support. By as little as $3 a month, you can cancel at any time.
Unity doesn't mean sameness. It means solidarity. Now, how do we practice solidarity? Raya, you have any examples of how we have done it in the past and it's worked?
I do. It's helpful maybe even to talk about what solidarity even means. I remember watching a TV show. This was probably back in the 90s, and I think it was like a cable access, and they were talking about some student protest that was happening. And on the show, they had a big fist sign up, and it said solidarity. And I remember thinking, what does solidarity even mean? I don't even, that's not a word that I use outside of this. And the more that I kept watching it, the more I kept thinking, what do they actually mean by that? And so I looked it up here, and this just comes from, it's Oxford Languages is where it's coming from, but I just did a quick web search. It's unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest or mutual support within a group. And so, for instance, you look at some of our history as a community. Of course, the big one that we look to is the Stonewall uprising.
Absolutely.
When Stonewall happened, this was back in 1969. It was a gay bar in Manhattan, and they were constantly raided by the police that would come in and harass people, and you could be arrested at that time for performing indecent acts or whatever they called it. What they meant is there were no indecent acts. It was people just expressing that they were gay. And finally, the community had enough, and Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera stood up, and they said, we're done with this, and they led a riot. And the thing that I love about looking at the history of this is how much diversity there was from that very beginning moment, that you had gay men, and you had transgender women, and you had lesbian people coming and joining, and you had people of color joining in right away from the very beginning, from the very foundation of our movement. We had diversity. Then the very next year, they got together and they said, we need to celebrate this. We need to remember this. Really, at that point, it was more than just celebration. It was remembering it, and it was standing together saying, we need to keep fighting because we're not where we need to be. So that very next year, in 1970, they put together the very first Pride March. It was the Christopher Street Liberation Day is what they called it. And they got together that very first Pride gathering. And that's why we do Pride in June every year ever since then.
And you'll notice that when we do Pride, it does include, when you go to a Pride event, you will see LGBTQ plus at every one of those Pride events. It is a unification of people. And plenty of people out there who are also affirming. Plenty.
I think one of the next big things that came up happened about a decade later during the AIDS crisis. ACT UP and AIDS activism, that this is where I hear stories over and over again about how, especially the lesbian community, but really the entire LGBTQ plus community, came alongside of the gay community because AIDS was disproportionately affecting gay men. And the rest of the community rose up and said, we need to help. This is devastating. This is hurting our people.
Yes.
I have some close friends that lived through that time. They are a gay couple that has been together, that lived through the entire AIDS crisis. And they said they watched as friend after friend after friend of theirs died. I can't imagine. It would have been like living through a war zone.
Yes.
Just from being a gay man. And so our community came together and found solidarity during that time. And eventually, because enough people were speaking up, it took much longer than it should have taken. But eventually, the wider society paid attention and said, we need to take this seriously.
Why are we now bringing this up? Why do we talk about this? I'll tell you why. Because some people also right now feel as though they are excluded or that they've excluded others. For example, maybe trans people in gay spaces, and we have a report about that. Am I right?
That's right. As I said, in England, there is a big movement to drop the T for many people because there's a large transphobic movement that has swept through. And you see that as a whole in America. When newspapers report on trans issues, you'll just see them reporting on here's what's going on. But in Great Britain, there still is a large feeling that they need to both sides everything. So, well, some people feel transgender people deserve rights, but the other side says that trans people do not deserve rights. Unfortunately, it's really sad. We have a lot of growth that we need to do in England and in other parts of the world as well. I know I have been involved with a lot of women's festivals. Women's music festivals have traditionally been a space for lesbians to gather together in community. And there's been a real question on some of those festivals always being open to transgender women like me, and some of them saying, if you were not born as a woman, you are not welcome here. And big controversy that has come up with that. Those are spaces that are very near and dear to my heart. And I know some people that stood on the other side of that issue.
So how do we build the bridge forward? Real LGBTQ plus unity look like to you? How can we show up for each other across the lines of age and gender identity? Ask yourself these questions. What can I do?
We've seen examples from history, and these are happening again. So, for instance, in 1979, 1987, there were national marches on Washington where our entire community had massive marches in each one of those years. Now we're seeing lots of protests and groups of people getting together and saying, this is a time where we want our voices to be heard. One of my favorite stories was the Sweden protest for declassification. This was back in 1979,
yes,
when they were still classifying homosexuality as a mental sickness. And so in 1979, activists in Sweden decided to call in sick with homosexuality.
That was pretty good.
They occupied a government office and they successfully demanded that homosexuality be removed from the list of illnesses. It was a collective action that made the whole thing come together, and that's what really made the whole thing work. Your solidarity might be using your gifts in particular ways. A lot of people are great artists, or you are a cartoonist, or you know how to do things with words, and you're the ones out there making the memes that get shared on Facebook. Those things really matter.
But they don't just matter to your letter. It's every part of the LGBTQ plus community. So if you're just putting out the G, we are a united group. Let's see you cross over to some of those other areas. When we fight together, to make certain that we are getting equal rights and that we're being treated equally. It's because we are doing it together that makes it work.
And there are places for those individual communities. Don't get me wrong. As I said, I really enjoy some of the women's festivals that are specifically lesbian spaces. Those spaces have felt very affirming to me. But just because that feels affirming doesn't mean that I want to limit my viewpoint and my activism to only things that matter to that community.
Right.
I want to make sure I'm looking to anybody that is being marginalized, so especially in the LGBTQ plus community. But as Audre Lorde said, there is no hierarchy of oppressions. I want to end with this very famous poem. You may have heard it before, but if you haven't, if this is your first time, very important. This was the poem by Martin Niemöller, who said, "They came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. They came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. They came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me. And by that time, no one was left to speak up."
Wow.
This is the time.
Yes.
Heed that warning. We must stand together. The days of purity tests of, do you believe A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, and well, you're right on all those, but we differ on S, so you can't be part of my group. We can't have that. We must stand together. We must stand in unity and in solidarity.
Absolutely. And what can you listeners do this week? What can we here, Raya, you and I do this week to connect? Well, I've got some suggestions. If there's an event going on, attend an event. Support queer-owned businesses. And maybe you could check in on a friend and see how they're doing. You have your own connections. Make certain that they realize we are a united group. Show your unification with others. And with that, you can enjoy more unification by coming here again each week.
We continue to brainstorm ways together that we can have solidarity and we can work. Share this podcast with somebody else that you know needs to be in solidarity with the wider LGBTQ plus community, because the more we work together, the more we all stand.
We absolutely do. And we hope you'll stand with us again right here next week. And with that, we'll see you Monday.
That's right. We can't do this with or without you. Okay, I was trying to make another YouTube joke.
Oh.
Does not fit in there.